This is India's Consul General in the US saying India should adopt the Israeli model in Kashmir.
Because we already have a model in the world. I don't know why we don't follow it. It has happened in the Middle East. You have to look at if the Israeli people can do it, we can also do it.
In other words, he is advocating a settler colonial project for India in the disputed Kashmir region and calling for the building of settlements in the valley that replicates the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. So what is settler colonialism?
Settler colonization is a very specific kind of colonization that functions through the replacement of indigenous populations with the intention of gaining control over local resources or natural resources.
And in context to Kashmir, that project got an impetus when in August 2019, the Indian government unilaterally revoked Kashmir's special status and later divided the disputed region of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories. More than 500,000 Indian troops are stationed in Kashmir. In the days leading up to the annexation, thousands of additional troops were deployed. People were restricted to their homes and hundreds were detained. An unprecedented communications blackout was imposed to quell voices of dissent.
The naked colonization of Kashmir has taken place many decades before 2019. What happened on August 5 last year was an action of granting legal permissibility to that what was already going on in Kashmir without any legal authority.
Since then, fears of a demographic invasion have grown manifold in the Muslim-majority region. Critics say India's right-wing Hindu nationalist government, the BJP, has introduced new laws that have paved way for a gradual takeover of political, administrative and economic institutions of Jammu and Kashmir.
The ordinary Kashmiri's life has been upended over this past 1 year by the theatre of unending war that is being wrought upon us to satisfy the pursuit of electoral interests in India. Throughout this year, we have been responding to one crisis after the other as India feeds its population a rhetoric of moral superiority that allows them to wage war on the aberrant Kashmiri as well as the putative directives of Islam. First, we were not allowed to communicate with our families for weeks. Then we faced mass arrests, judicial apathy, media ban, torture and killings. The state engineered anxiety and shock to make us wonder if they will commit mass killings or go to war with Pakistan or China or both.
For more than 70 years, the Kashmir conflict has remained a bone of contention between two nuclear powers, India and Pakistan. Tensions between Indian authorities and pro-independence groups have increased since an armed uprising in 1989 against the Indian rule. According to the rights groups, some 100,000 people have been killed since that uprising and a subsequent Indian military crackdown.
मैं आज जम्मू कश्मीर के इन साथियों को भरोसा देता हूं कि धीरे-धीरे हालात सामान्य हो जाएंगे और उनकी परेशानी भी कम होती चली जाएगी.
During the first 6 months of 2020, nearly 229 killings took place in different incidents of violence. This included at least 32 civilians, 143 rebels, and 54 armed forces personnel. At least 107 cordon and search operations and cordon and destroy operations were conducted in Jammu and Kashmir. More than 50 encounters took place between Indian forces and the rebel groups. And during these encounters, vandalism and destruction of civilian properties was reported, which continued during the coronavirus lockdown, rendering many families homeless amid a pandemic.
The Indian government has claimed that this policy decision will bring economic benefits to Kashmir. However, due to destruction of our e-commerce by internet restrictions and by the devastating blow to our economy, Kashmir's Chamber of Commerce has estimated a loss of $2.4 billion just between August and December last year. Right now, our losses are estimated at $4 billion. We have experienced the world's longest ever shutdown of internet in any democracy, and the effect of this has been on 8 million people. 45% of Kashmir's adult population is now showing symptoms of mental health deterioration. Kashmiri export has declined by 62%. Tourism in Kashmir has declined by 86%. It has also been claimed that this decision will facilitate investment into Kashmir. However, Article 370 and Kashmir's autonomy was never a hindrance to investment or development, as Indian companies have always been free to invest in Kashmir. The lack of investment is directly related to political turmoil in Kashmir, which is only set to exacerbate with public anger. It is also pertinent to mention that despite 72 years of political turmoil and military turmoil, Kashmir is well above nearly all Indian states in terms of human development indicators. and these figures beg a reassessment of the current policy if development is the reasoning behind it.
Since May 2020, thousands of non-Kashmiris have been issued controversial residency certificates. They entitle a person to residency, investment, and government jobs in Jammu and Kashmir. According to the new rules, any person who has lived in Kashmir for 15 years or has studied in the region for 7 years is eligible for this domicile certificate.
The consequence is going to be demographic change. You see, India's population is 100 times that of Kashmir's population. And in the first week alone since this policy was announced, 33,000 domicile certificates were issued. Right now there are reports of buses full of non-Kashmiris entering Kashmir. These are people who are Indians who will now be given political rights in Kashmir. They will get to vote in local elections and they'll try to disempower Kashmiris. You see, prior to this policy, a total of 500,000 government jobs were available only for the permanent residents of Kashmir. But under the new arrangement, it opens the field to any Indian who qualifies, who meets the criteria. And this is being done without taking the consent of the Kashmiri people. The 2016 Economic Survey report has pegged 25% of Kashmir's population between the ages of 18 and 29 as unemployed. This new change is set to increase the levels of unemployment. It also needs to be understood that only 30% of land in Kashmir is habitable and fit for cultivation, and already 50,000 acres or about 20,000 hectares of land is under occupation of the Indian Army. So there is very little habitable land to go around for the new domiciles without deforestation in Kashmir. The unplanned influx of Indians into Kashmir can cause an irreparable impact on the ecology and the livelihood of the people of Kashmir. Assessing from the developments that are taking place right now, it is quite likely that the Kashmiri landscape will be seeded with predatory, militarized settlements in a hegemonic fashion blatantly similar to what is happening in Palestine. The implications of this can only be calamitous.
A report by 3 UN special rapporteurs says that the Indian government is coercing journalists into silence through the threat of criminal sanctions. The rapporteurs say Indian authorities should respect and ensure the freedom from arbitrary arrest or detention and right to freedom of expression under the international human rights law. The internet shutdown was partially lifted in January this year. Since then, Kashmiris have been given access to the slow-speed 2G internet, and the ban on high-speed internet still continues even during the times of the coronavirus pandemic. In just 6 months, there have been 55 instances of internet blockades in the valley.
The restrictions being placed on internet and press freedom are definitely intended to coerce these spaces of dissent into silence through legal as well as extrajudicial means. Since August 5, 2019, there have been many fact-finding teams of journalists, activists, lawyers which have visited Kashmir, and every team has reported that restrictions on dissent are causing a catastrophe along with media blackout, communication blockade, and the arrest of journalists. Now, a public policy that affects the future of so many people cannot be made in darkness through executive whim by brute suppression of dissent. Such repressive moves are just not compatible with any democracy, but these have been the modus operandi in Kashmir for many decades now. With the rapid legislative changes making way for disenfranchisement, forcible transfer of population, we fear that our home will never be the same again. And this explosive tension in Kashmir will lead to some catastrophe that will push us towards more conflict. And in Kashmir, we fear that we are going to be added to this oblivion of statistics of destruction from around the world.